West Indies. And our theme this evening is the budget 2023, a look after the dust has settled, a very exciting theme. And for this evening, we have a co-chair, and the co-chair is Dr. Gonzalez. But just before I introduce Dr. Gonzalez, I am Denise Deming. I'm very happy to be part of this activity. And let me just make some reminders. We all know this, but just some reminders. Please unmute unless you're speaking, because that can give us some feedback and make the whole presentation a little bit uncomfortable. So please unmute. If you wish to make a comment, please put it in the chat, or you may raise your hand. And the final point that I wish to make is, whatever you're saying, please be concise, because everybody wants to participate and everybody wants to contribute. So please be as concise as possible. Well, let me now introduce Dr. Gonzalez. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much, Denise. Let me start by welcoming all of you here tonight. I think it's quite a sacrifice to come here on a Friday night, but I see people keep coming every Friday, so that's a very good sign. We have had two forums like these before where we have discussed the budget, and as usual, one needs to follow up that discussion by a post-budget discussion. So tonight we want to go into some details about the post-budget scenario. I think there are a number of things that would have evolved since the budget was presented, which we need to take into account. I mean, also need to look at what so many other groups in the country have said. There's quite a long debate in the Senate, in the lower house, among various stakeholders, the chambers of commerce, the trade unions, academia, and so forth, that it was really quite a mouthful. I have tried to follow some of it, but I must admit that it's really too much. But before I dig deeper into this, let me just back up for one or 2 minutes and say a few words in tribute to our colleague, Dr. Lester Henry. I'm sure we all here would remember him. As when I started on this budget question, for example, in the Economics Association, I remember he came along very willingly. You know, he would always be ready to make a contribution and come and discuss with us and so forth. So it is indeed quite a loss for us to see that he has passed at such an early age. It was quite a shock to me, and I'm sure it is also quite a surprise to all of you. I do hope that his memory would be respected, and to some extent we may be able to probably hold one or two tributes to him in the days and months ahead. But it's certainly a loss to us, and someone, of course, he was more than just a colleague at UWI, in that he functioned in the Senate and in other places and so on. Pretty multifaceted in many ways. But certainly he will be missed, and I want to extend on my behalf, and of course on your behalf, our condolences and sympathies to his family, to his wife, and all his dear friends. May he rest in peace, and maybe we can just have a minute of silence in respect for his passing. Just 1 minute of silence. Okay. Well, tonight I think we want to look at the situation with the budget since it has been presented. what developments, what new developments have occurred. Even yesterday, I saw where the Minister of Finance has issued a statement showing where the financial situation is much better than he had anticipated. And that just throws some new light on possibilities available for us. So that is, in a sense, something one would have to take into account. There are many other things which have occurred and which we need to look at. And on this, we are going to try to do tonight, in a way, trying to see how, to what extent the budget may be able to deal with certain things. I think last time we looked at the question of the impact of the windfall, how it would affect, and each speaker did indicate to some extent what kind of impact they saw the windfall as having. But we have a few more details on the windfall, and we have seen over the last couple of months, we have gotten a better idea as to where oil and gas prices are likely to go. We see a kind of fluctuation, and we're getting slightly a better picture of what may happen in the future. But we're going to come back to this, and I think we need to try to put some kind of precision on what we are likely to expect in the future as a result of this budget. So I want to leave it at that at this point. I'll certainly come back later on, and I want to pass on to Denise. I think you are going to introduce Dr. Tiwari. I have the scenario, I have the guide in my head. I don't think I recorded it. I was just looking for it on my computer. But I think it's your turn now to introduce Dr. Tiwari. Over to Denise.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gonzalez. Right. And my task is to introduce Dr. Bohindra Tiwari, who is a former Minister of Trade, Enterprise and Tourism. He's also a former Minister of Planning and Sustainable Development. He's served in both houses. And when we say he served in both houses, it means he served as a senator, as well as an MP, an elected member of parliament. And that is significant. Beyond the politics and government, he's played a key role in education as the ex-director of the IOB, which is now known as the Art. He's also been a chair of NEHURST, and he's also served as a principal and pro-vice chancellor of the University of the West Indies. When you would hear all of that and think, well, you know, what else has he done? Well, he has written and he responds every time, I think, someone asks him to make a comment about the development of our country. May I now, with very great pleasure, introduce Dr. Tiwari. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very, very much, Denise. It's a pleasure to be here. I want to acknowledge that Lester Henry was a colleague of mine both at university and in the parliament. And my condolences go out to his family. May his soul rest in peace. And I want to thank Tedu for having me here as the feature speaker today. In the limited time we have, I will focus on 5 of government's identified priorities and ask the question, if we can we expect decisive progress on these by May 2023, which is when the mid-year review will come. And that will also be a midterm review because it will be 2.5 years into the 5-year second term of the government. Or by September 2023, when the next budget will be due for the 2024 fiscal cycle. And I want to focus on crime and food, and youth and jobs and digitalization. One of the priorities of the government, as identified in several of its documents, is fostering citizen safety and security. Now, we had 16 murders over the Diwali weekend. And since then to today, several more. The question that arises is, will we keep repeating this performance? Will we reverse it? Will the situation December 31st? And what is there in the budget that can address that? I will come back to that in a minute. The second priority that the government identifies is ensuring food safety and security. The question that needs to be asked is how much of our $6 billion food bill will be saved? What portion of the 85% of our food imports will we now produce? How much more of what we consume or can produce will we in fact produce or expand production for? This is what the review of the economy says about agriculture. Data, I quote, data on Trinidad and Tobago's domestic agricultural production has indicated mostly negative outturns for the first quarter of fiscal 22. The producers of rice, other pulses, root crops, fruits, vegetables, dairy, and poultry posted lower output levels. We had increased production in copra, small ruminants, and pigs. And again, I continue to quote, domestic agriculture was challenged by excessive rainfall, pest diseases, predatory larceny, the high cost and availability of inputs, and the effects of climate change, particularly extreme weather-related events such as extreme dry weather and intense rainfall. This is on page 77 of the review of the economy. Now, tell me what in the budget will get Trinidad and Tobago to where it needs to be in this time of world food shortages, where we need to have greater self-sufficiency and reduction of food imports and stronger local inputs into agro-processing and manufacturing. And we can also, in my view, export significantly if we produce amply. Think of the regional tourism industry, for instance, with the regional import bill for that, and how Trinidad and Tobago can make a difference. I will come back to this tourism question. The third priority is identified as investing in strategic areas to create growth and jobs. So the creation of jobs and investment for that are considered important. In the budget, the new economic zone in Maruga is identified as being able to create 128 jobs. You wait to see. Phoenix Park will create 546 new jobs, we are told. But the review also tells us that real economic activity in construction contracted by 9.2%. Cement sales fell by 7.6%. And after COVID, we had a 71.2% contraction in tourism. The labor participation rate, it indicates as 55%. So what I think we need to look at a little carefully is the migration rate of our tertiary educated graduates, professionals, entrepreneurs, and skilled people whom our economy cannot now absorb. 36,000 people migrated to the US in 2022. A lesser but still substantial number migrated to Canada. And Canada seems to have an open door policy to young qualified people. Two of our academics, one of them is with us, Professor Anthony Gonzalez, and the other is Dr. Nasser Mustafa from the sociology department, spoke to The Guardian not too long ago on the significant brain drain now being experienced in Trinidad and Tobago, and the fact that people migrate to greener pastures and that they are losing hope in Trinidad and Tobago. A radio talk show 2 days ago asked listeners if TT was facing its darkest hour. Most said yes. Maybe that is how those who choose to migrate feel. Because the real reason people migrate is that they hardly have a chance of being absorbed properly in the Trinidad and Tobago economy because it is not growing. We are not attracting investment from abroad, or companies are investing elsewhere. We are not diversifying. We are not expanding exports. We are not moving up the value chain. Moreover, we are losing half of our high school cohort each year because they are not equipped to enter the economic mainstream nor to go on to further education. What are the options? Microbusiness, idleness, second chance, options, mischief, crime. The Minister of National Security was quoted yesterday in The Guardian as saying, "You will be policing a very violent society," he said to 110 recruits. And he continues, "We continue to have in TT a high incidence of organized crime and violence and unwanted gang activities in our streets and in our communities." What the minister was outlining in the statement is really a kind of recruitment structure that has emerged in this country for the unaccommodated in the secondary school system, a recruitment structure for gangs, because it is just a few CSEC passes which separates those young recruits who can become police that he was talking to yesterday, and those who can become gangland recruits. That is one of Trinidad and Tobago's reading. So all crime reduction and citizen give our country a pathway to solutions. Because the problem is not national security has consistent high budgetary allocations implemented. This year, national security got 5.798 billion, third after health and education. But as you can see, education got a 7.453 billion allocation, the highest, and that doesn't save the 16-year-olds from failure or from the gangs, nor does it prevent our tertiary graduates from migrating. In fact, we have created an export product in human capital when that intellectual capital pool could have been an attractor for quality non-energy export investment. And we have made a track directly from schooling to crime in Trinidad and Tobago. And so in national security and its related institutions, we have a situation where the Coast Guard ships do not go out to sea. The minister, prime minister, and police chief talk about intelligence. They have and indicate number of gangs, but we don't see intelligence at work for crime reduction or gangs being dismantled and brought to justice. What we see instead is increase in murders and gangland rampages, and this seems to be out of the reach of the law. I could talk about guns through customs, criminals through immigration, human trafficking under the nose of the military apparatus and law enforcement, as I can talk about drugs in the same way. But all I would say is that money is not the problem, nor is it the only. We always need money to do things, but more than money is needed to get things done. The budget does not give us a pathway to increase food production, reduce import costs, or a buoyant agricultural sector either. Giving land to urban youth will not shield these youth from all the problems identified in the review of the economy that work against farmers, rain, flood, drought, bridal nasty. Clearly, Trinidad and Tobago needs a different approach that has little to do with the quantum of government expenditure. There are things which require fixing, and to fix things, you need people and you need pathways. And how do you create jobs when the state is so large in the economy, running every company except NGC and FCB at a loss to the taxpayer? Most of them cannot pay their wage bills, and the confidence level is so poor that the private sector is fearful of investing. And because of the size of the state and the relationship between politics and contracts and economic opportunities, not only individual citizens, but businesses are dependent on the state. After 60 full years of independence, Trinidad and Tobago has become one huge loss-making state dependency, whose revenue base is now threatened because government wants to continue with the same budgetary approach, 93% recurrent, 7% development, government spending for everything, little fair and open opportunity for the private sector, few, if any, public-private partnership, government and political control in everything. In this climate, no meaningful investment or development can happen. The waterfront project in San Fernando, for instance, which was conceived as a possible public-private partnership in my time, is now a fully government-funded project. That is where we are. And you need more than annual budget, mid-year review 6 months later, and the next budget 1 year later to get Trinidad and Tobago to where we need to be. So my view is that nothing meaningfully significant, we will not be able to celebrate anything meaningfully significant at the mid-year review or at the end of this fiscal cycle. We will be very little or no better off in crime, food security, jobs, and income creation, or in prospects for you. We may get bursts of provocation from the Minister of Finance, but little more. Like the statement he made today about an almost balanced budget in fiscal 22, which is laughable because although the numbers might be correct, the socio-economic and socio-political realities of our current environment and context totally escape the Minister of Finance. Because it is not revenue and expenditure or deficit questions only. It is an issue of governance, government, and economic competence. This takes us to another key priority of government, the fifth, creating a digital nation. The government says that it wants digital government, digital business, digital society, and they have committees overseeing this. I don't know how much progress has been made in each of these areas or how what is happening in each is being connected or integrated. But we all need to understand where the most competitive companies and the most competitive countries in the world are going. Because if we don't understand that well from our best interest point of view, Trinidad and Tobago, and indeed the entire Caribbean region, will be left behind. Our Caribbean countries are high and middle income countries with no sustainable future in the world that is emerging in front of us. That is the absolute truth. High and middle income countries without a sustainable future. And if the region does not connect with the technological leap that is taking place, then we will have missed yet another opportunity. Let us for a moment try to appreciate the digital restructuring of the global economy and society is taking place. The United Nations called, quote, the share, which it says will surge from 2014 to 335 billion in 2025. Worldwide shipments of 3D printers were expected to reach 6.7 million by the end of 2020. A sharing economy means that you have to be included to share. 3D printers spread in this ubiquitous way will change the entire structure of manufacturing. In 2017, the e-commerce contribution to global GDP was 29 trillion US, or 36%. In 2017, 277 million people made cross-border purchases. In 2019, digitally deliverable service exports amounted to 2.9 trillion US, equivalent to 50% of global service exports. In 2019, also, global internet traffic was 66 times the volume of the entire global internet traffic in 2005. The pandemic months and years have accelerated this process. By 2022, this year, global IP traffic is projected to reach 150,000 gigabytes per second, fueled by more and more people in the world coming online for the first time, and by the expansion of the Internet of Things, that is machine-to-machine transactions. All of this that I'm speaking here is from UNCTAD's Digital Economy Report 2019. I'm not making it up. This fourth industrial revolution technology is the essential underlying infrastructure, along with cloud computing for the next digital age. Closely interconnected with 5G technology, fifth generation broadband technology, is cloud computing, necessary to store and process vast amounts of data, including for a wide range of e-commerce and specific applications that allow for remote work. All of this has attracted huge investments globally and has accelerated rapidly after the pandemic. At the center of the global restructuring are the big giants, the Apples, the Amazons, and so on. I won't go into that. But what is happening is that the geopolitics is changing. And the competition between China and the US for this 5G control is a major factor in all of that in terms of geopolitical and economic strategy. I have already publicly indicated that Trinidad and Tobago phones carrying 2G and 3G technology cannot operate in the US for voice calls. That is because our carriers, TSTT and Digicel, have not upgraded voice connectivity separately, as let's say AT&T and T-Mobile have done in the US. Although Trinidad and Tobago is supposed to be on 4G, as I have said, 5G is necessary for the fourth industrial revolution opportunities, which include Internet of Things, cloud computing, big digital streaming, robotics, cyber networks, virtual worlds, metaverse, artificial intelligence. And as such, there are opportunities, and as you would expect, there are also threats. I won't go into that, and dangers. But I am not sure that we are proceeding as methodically as we can with digitalization. The minister responsible has strong technical competence. But when I look at the budgetary numbers, I don't know. A project here, fintech there, a digital platform there, money allocated in the PSIP for various projects in the ministry, digital economy, etc. I don't know in the end where it will take us by May of 2023, nor where it will take us by September, October of 2023. Let me close, however, by showing what might be possible, starting with a regional strategy for an industry that is the #1 industry for most countries of the Caribbean, and an industry in which Trinidad and Tobago needs to become seriously involved if we are to deal with the challenges that we are now having in energy. And that is sustainable tourism. Trinidad and Tobago was just named #1 destination as a basically untouched, beautiful island. And Trinidad and Tobago, the turtle watching was mentioned. So we are doing well internationally that we want to matter in terms of tourism perception. Suppose we strategically address the regional food production and supply question for regional tourism. Trinidad and Tobago can boost production significantly, earn foreign exchange, and the regional tourism industry will become less import dependent. Suppose we effectively digitalize tourism in the region, but especially in Trinidad and Tobago, and created 5G capacity in our country. Our marketing approach would have to change and could change to cyberspace, virtual space, and metaverse, providing the experience before the experiencing, and a platform not just for destination, but for a 12-month cycle of diverse events can be established. And eventually, with build-up of a sustainable tourism success, we will have established through tourism strategy a marketing platform for everything else with online delivery capability that we might want to design, including cloud storage outside of the industrialized centers. Moreover, Trinidad and Tobago can offer enough of a quality of life and quality of living lifestyle to become a remote work destination. But first, we would have to come up with a rational plan for our own national approach for remote work. We cannot not have remote work in Trinidad and advertise remote work for tourism. So tourism alone, properly done, could strengthen regional cooperation in a serious way across the region, because it makes economic sense and has direct economic benefits. It can boost agricultural production and increase supply. It can win foreign exchange. It can move us up the technology value chain, alter and enhance our global presence and global marketing strategy, and enhance our product lines to develop other important service exports, such as education and health and cloud storage and nearshoring, where citizens work from Trinidad and for US dollars for companies outside, not to mention a cycle of events and transformation of the quality of visitors and the length of stay. Other sectors could be thought through like that, but for its real potential. But I stop at tourism because it is something that can unite the region for economic benefit, and something that can take us from production in the ground in agriculture to the deepest and highest technologies that are now available. So on the current trajectory, the 2023 budget will not get us anywhere significant on crime, food sustainability, job creation, prospects for youth, nor digitalization by May next year, mid-year and midterm, nor by September 2023 next budget. We have to break the mold. The government does not get it and cannot do it, and the world is not waiting for anyone, even though God might be a trend. What does it take to give 1.4 million people a decent standard of living. We have to help ourselves. God helps them who help themselves. There's no economic solution, in my view, without a political solution in Trinidad and Tobago. And the political solutions cannot be one of two, and it cannot be what can win. The political solution has to be what can govern well enough to get Trinidad and Tobago out of this mess of unviability and unsustainability, and national and citizen impoverishment, human capital flight, and financial capital diversion, and economic deterioration. This challenge requires a clear grasp of the larger challenges and the skills and competence, personal discipline, and the trust of the population to do it. And it requires a trustworthy group and a competent team working for the public good and for the long term to do it. 17 years ago, I said most of the state institutions in Trinidad and Tobago were failing, and that if we did not take stock, we would end up as a failed state. I was chastised and accused of calling Trinidad and Tobago a failed state, which I did not do and which I had not done. I did not say that. I said then that we were failing. And I say today that we are failing worse than ever now. I say so. And I also say that we have to do something quickly. A well-known academic told me a few days ago that she was living in a state of constant fright. Another friend, a young master's degree graduating today, told me in a WhatsApp that the Trinidad and Tobago economy is stagnant. The place is in economic turmoil. We can't cope with the crime and murder. Citizens are in constant distress. Everybody has a lower quality of life and there are no jobs. It seems that there is no functioning government, leadership, or management in the country, and that anything can happen. And I want to warn that it can. And we just can't wait for something to happen, can we? Every country today, after the panic, and given the kind of things that have followed the panic and given the war now, every country is in an economic or financial mess of some kind. But generally, they seem to have the means to cope. But the problem here is government clarity and competence does not seem to exist. Governance credibility does not seem to exist. And the breakdown of the communication process and the social capital framework makes it almost impossible to summon our citizens to cohere and to do something together. It is my view that we have a major economic, political, social, and governance crisis. All of this at the same time. And I think that this requires more than economic intervention, because it requires a responsible citizen intervention to make economic possibilities likely. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Tiwari. I think your presentation was very interesting. You adopted a political economy analysis and a much broader context, in the sense that you looked at several dimensions: the economic, the political, the governance, the social, and tried to put the budget in that context to see to what extent it would impact in the short to long term on our development. You were very pessimistic in terms of what you believe the possibilities are. And I think you're convinced that a much broader set of changes on the political and economic front are needed for us to push things forward. So that your approach is basically what I would call a very kind of transformative one, looking at the budget as being able to contribute to that process of transformation. Well, certainly you've raised a number of issues that we would come back to. I have made note of some of them, and we will raise some questions in the next round. At this point, I have to move on to Professor Roger Hossain, my good friend, and let me first of all compliment him on the achievement of his professorship. I think certainly it is well deserved. As I said, you have worked, you have toiled a lot in the vineyard, and today you're reaping the rewards of that hard labor. Congratulations again. I've said it to you already before on 2 occasions. Well, we know Roger very well. I think there's no need really for me to introduce him. He's of course the founder of this group, this TADU unit, and we interact with him in several fora and various chats and so on. Roger has done a tremendous amount of writing on several things. His specialty is of course really trade, and he functions as a senior lecturer, now a professor in international trade and development. So tonight he's going to continue where he left off last time. Last time we dealt with just generally the budget, the outlook we saw for the budget. I think tonight he's going to look at some of what he believes to be the impact the budget is likely to have in the light of certain new developments that we weren't able to anticipate. So over to you, Roger.
Okay, good night, everyone. I hope you all can hear me. Are you all hearing?
I'm hearing.
Right, good.
Yes, loud and clear. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. I just like to, before I formally start, state that certainly I would be making a recommendation to the Department of Economics to see if we could start something akin to a Lester Henry Memorial Lecture. He served our Department of Economics for about 27 years and gave good service. You know, he covered the area of monetary economics. In fact, when you really get to know how much your colleagues or what workload they are carrying, when you are asked to carry it, and he carried a heavy workload. So having said that, I would move on. You know, that was a very good commentary, introductory starting innings by Dr. Tiwari. I saw he mentioned the piece by Imbert where he looked at the fiscal outturn. Now I read this fiscal outturn. I can't help but chuckle a little. Sorry about that. I wonder why people write these kind of things. You know, it's why do we write these kind of things and put it in the public domain? In the sense that now the minister is not saying anything incorrect. You know, he is not. All of the numbers I looked at the numbers closely are correct, but none of these numbers really were on account of any domestic policy. All of these numbers here basically were on account of a shock because of the invasion of Ukraine by Putin. So you cannot come out and say, well, you bold and noble, or you are being dishonest. You may probably be able to say it's a wide, but I read this as the audience that reads this, if they are not sure, could be misled. They could be left thinking basically all is well and some type of practical, hardcore, technically sound intervention led to a contraction of expenditure and an expansion of non-energy revenues, and therefore we progressed well. Now, one of the things I would like to urge, and that all pay some little bit of attention to, is that the non-energy fiscal balance is worsening. And in fact, just before we came on, I didn't get time to upgrade the specific graph. I looked at the 2023 version of this, and it's even a little deeper than 2022. Fiscal year 2023, I think it was about 26 billion. And you know, I always say, and the minister said it in the budget speech, you know, the minister is aware that money has to go into the HSF because oil and energy revenues are part of an intergenerational asset. And yet, having said that and having understood that, you see a wide gap between energy revenue and the non-energy fiscal balance. You see an economy in which we spend out the energy revenues as we extract it. Now, if you have a business and you generate energy, you generate some profits, and you don't invest that profit in a way that can help you keep the firm alive and growing and vibrant, then as the machinery and capital equipment in the firm depreciates, the firm will start to become smaller and shrink. So, and given that our HSF is only $4.5 billion now, when we continue with this strategy of spending out all of the energy revenues, where would we get money? Supposing next year we have another major crash in the global economy, God forbid. The HSF is where we can store some resources for further use. And so these numbers here really have me a little concerned. And I know Kevin will picture this, so I won't spend much time on it. The price of oil since we read the budget, you know, it hasn't really crossed the $92.50 threshold. And if you look at, you know, we pitched at US $6 per barrel, per MMBTU of gas, sorry. And only about 7 times in the last 165 months, the price of gas crossed $6 per MMBTU. So 7 times out of 165, it cost US $6, and yet still we went at 165 as US $6 per MMBTU. And again, I hope that works out as the minister thinks it would work out. Otherwise, we would be struggling and again to balance our budget. Now, there are many schools of thought and many good scholars that comment on the way we should treat energy revenues. And many of these schools of thought point in the direction of sterilizing the economy by extracting the energy revenues and putting it away, and using the energy revenues, the income, to help smooth long-term consumption. And our strategy is a very disturbing one. Our strategy is one in which we spend out the energy revenues basically as we extract it. On transfers and subsidies, this is the graph here that shows the relationship. And even when energy revenues tumbled, we maintained a high degree of inertia in transfers and subsidies. And you know, I had the experience and I really value the conversation. I have a new international trade class at the university. Some of them are on here. And some of these students, when I raised this with them, I told them the state of the economy. You know, they were surprised, and the question came up, but what did you all do about it? What did you all, how come we are in this terrible position? What did you all as the adults do about it? And I must confess, it's one of the most difficult questions I face every year. It's embarrassing. I would like someone like the Minister of Finance to join a class like this and face those questions, because it's difficult for me as a layperson in terms of the politics to answer it, where all the money has gone, the rise in per capita debt and so on, and it's a difficult scenario. And I heard Dr. Tiwari also mention the homicide situation in the country. I've actually started to model it and we'll do some work on it. I narrowed down the discussion. There are much more variables to economically inactive population and the real transfers and subsidies as 2 variables that are co-integrated with the homicide level in the country using data from 1966 to 2022. I will refine this as I go along. It's just a contribution. I think it's about time that we bring some hardcore quantitative work to assess the homicide situation by way of specifying the factors that has led to the high level of homicide. This graph I would have presented the last time and I brought it back here. I just improved it a little based on some other data that I got to show that non-energy, non-tradable production as a proportion of non-energy tradable is going up after 2018. And what you want, Prof. Gonzalez, is you want that variable to move in downwards. So, of course, you know, Prof. Gonzalez in particular and me, we had some deep conversations on this. We are not necessarily on the same page, although I hope as time has progressed, he may have seen even 5% of my argument, because I think the non-energy, non-tradable sector has grown in relation to the non-energy tradable sector because the Venezuelan workers remain substantively unregistered, they go and work in the non-energy, non-tradable sector. So the lack of policy intervention and the lack of structure and planning on the labor market with a massive immigration population from Venezuela is showing itself up in the structure of production in exactly the way we don't want. And you can see there it's inversely related basically with the stock of reserves. So I don't know. How much time must we say this? How much time must we call for? And I make a lot of jokes sometimes when I am in seminars like this. I even once asked my class, do we still have a minister of labor? And in that, this is something that the Minister of Labor should be most vocal on, educating the population on the strategy. How do we transform this migrant group? Why don't we at a basic minimum register them? And one of the things that I did do in the modeling here is, if you look carefully, you would see in the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 line exogenous variables, long run only. And that term you are seeing there that I am highlighting, I hope you all can see that I've highlighted it, is the Venezuelan real GDP growth that Kevin Ramnarine pointed out to me to include. And it helped tighten the co-integrating relationship that I found, although I use it as an exogenous variable. I'm still probing at this to see what it would say to me and what I would find, but the preliminary information suggests that our murder level is also influenced by the decline in GDP in Venezuela. The causality linkages and whatnot we would have to elaborate, but it means at a minimum we should register these people here and have an idea of who have a criminal background and whatnot, so we would know information is information. Denise, you can, I will just run through the rest of slides quickly. The non-energy export sector, as we see, is paling in comparison in relation to the growth of the energy export sector. And basically what I say here is that Dr. Tiwari summarized it well. At the end of the day, whilst I do acknowledge that we are making some progress in trade and in non-energy export trade, and I tip my hat to Paula Gopi's school in that regard, I am saying that the structure of the economy remains a problem, the growth of the economy remains a problem, and 2022, according to formal data from the CSO, has already started off on a bad footing with the first quarter, I believe, having -2% growth already. So it's a lot of work ahead. It's a lot of work ahead. And in this setting, I don't think ministers buffing up the technocrat has much value. I don't think so. I think if we work together and people work in harmony and with respect and treat the technocrats and their work with a certain amount of dignity and respect and take it on board, then I think all people pulling together in the same direction can create better results than we are seeing now. And anything is better than we are seeing now. We have been contracting basically since 2015. We are in a depression, not in a recession. So in that regard, I think there is good room for partnering, good room for people pulling together in the same direction, and certainly a ripe, fertile environment for a brand new body of thinking and a brand new body of policy making and interventions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Hussain. I mean, I used to call you Dr. Hussain, now it's Professor, but thank you very much for your presence. To your next class, make sure you write a letter, make sure it's delivered, and invite him, so that at least you won't be the only person taking pressure from your students. And that pressure is really good pressure because it means they're engaged. And that makes me feel a little bit optimistic, but thank you very much. My time, and I've always chuckled when I have to introduce him, because at one stage he told me the only thing to use to introduce him is to say he was born after independence. But we're going to do a little more than that. Kevin Ramnarine is a former graduate school of business. He's also the principal consultant for a regional organization called Triple Junction. Mr. Ramnarine, welcome this evening, and we look forward to your exciting presentation.
All right, good evening. And I hope everybody's hearing me and seeing me. We've been experiencing some connectivity issues. I don't know if that's because of the weather, but it's good to be here. And thanks to Dr. Tiwari for the introduction, and to Roger for his contribution. I would say, just to follow up on something Dr. Tiwari said, I am and Dr. Tiwari would know this, I am a great student of history. And I'll just add to something to what he said. I think that there's something which has put this country out of equilibrium in recent years. And I just leave you all to wonder what that could be. But I think that the political and economic matrix in Trinidad is out of equilibrium. Having said that, we were invited here to discuss the budget. And the budget has largely been forgotten because I think shortly after the budget, there was the Vincent Nelson saga started, and then we had all these rains. So by now, many people have forgotten the budget. But we are here to talk about the economy and what was in that budget. So I'll start off by sharing some slides, and hopefully this works. Is that being seen? All right. All right. Okay, Denise, you seeing that?
Yes, I'm seeing it, and you have it on presentation view, so it's excellent.
Good. This is a graph of natural gas prices. The blue bars are European gas prices, and the orange bars are American or Henry Hub gas prices over the period June 2021 to the present day, October 27th, I think that was yesterday. And it shows clearly a significant spike in the European gas price around August 2026, which was related to an issue with, of course, gas supply from Russia. And you would see gas prices in Europe are beginning to come down, and they're falling pretty quickly. American gas prices have more or less held their own. But the key point from this graph here is gas prices in Europe are falling. And our budget, of course, was based on an oil price and a gas price. And the gas price it was based on was $6 per MMBTU. And that price, $6, reflects the American price, also reflects somewhat the European price. But the big story is that the European price is collapsing. And one of the reasons is this graph here. What industrial countries in Europe have been able to do, of course, they have to survive without Russian gas. So the adaptation is already taking place. And you could see from the blue line, that's in the industrial sector in Europe. And that's the natural gas consumption for industry in Europe. You can see the blue line trending down into 2022. So what that means is that the European continent is turning down or turning off industrial plants, and of course prioritizing electricity and things like heating and so on, things that people need to live. So, and the other way Europe is adapting to what has happened with Russia and their gas supply into Europe is there's been a huge influx in LNG imports into Europe. Interestingly, Germany had never foreseen the need for setting up itself as an LNG importing country, but now they are scrambling to build regasification terminals. This is a graph, again, we are on the issue of price. Our budget is based heavily on two prices. This is the oil price, nothing really dramatic here. The minister based the budget on $92.50 per barrel of oil. And we've been averaging somewhere in the high 80s since the budget. The threat to the oil price going forward would be a global recession. We have seen there was an expectation that China would have relaxed the zero COVID policy after the Communist Party Congress last week, Saturday. That did not happen. Xi Jinping has said that they will continue with the zero COVID policy, which means that China's economy is going to be, of course, curtailed by the ongoing zero COVID policy. If that zero COVID policy is relaxed or removed, expect the Chinese economy to rebound rapidly and prices of oil, of course, to shoot past $100 per barrel. The other issue, of course, is the full effect of the European Union's embargo on Russia with respect to oil. The purchase of oil will take effect towards the end of the year. So those are factors which the recession, of course, it has an implication for demand, and the embargo has an implication for supply. So it is very difficult to foresee the future. In fact, one prominent economist from the UK, when I asked him about his view on the oil price, he told me he had three views. One was it could go up, the other one is that it could go down, or it could remain the same. So I didn't ask him any questions after that. What he was saying to me is that, it really is something which is very difficult to predict. But having said that, and in relating this back to the budget, the price $92.50 per barrel and the price $6 per MMBTU for gas are the highest price assumptions ever used in a budget in the history of Trinidad and Tobago since we've been using the oil price assumption, which I think goes back to the early 1990s. And since we've been using the gas price assumption, which goes back to 2005. The other interesting commodity which the Minister of Finance speaks a lot about is ammonia. This is a graph of ammonia prices from 2010 to 2022. And the light green line here is the Caribbean price, the Caribbean FOB, free on board price, which is essentially the price that Trinidad ammonia fetches at the port in Point Lisas. And you can see that somewhere around April 2022, ammonia prices for ammonia sold from Trinidad to the world peaked at $1,600 per ton. It's now down somewhere around $1,150 per ton, still extremely high. But when you consider that just 18 or maybe 24 months ago, that was below $200 a ton. It is a significant, almost six-fold increase in the price of ammonia in the space of 18 months. So, as I always say, somebody's making a lot of money on ammonia from this country. And in my analysis of the value chain for ammonia, it is not necessarily who we think it is. Most people would be inclined to think it's the ammonia plants in Point Lisas making the money. I think that the upstreamers who sell natural gas to the NGC might be the biggest beneficiaries of this high ammonia price, because the price that they realize for the gas that they sell to the NGC is pegged to ammonia. And then the NGC itself pegs their price that they sell to the plants in Point Lisa to ammonia. So it is probably being, shared throughout the value chain, but it's not correct to say the ammonia plants in Point Lisa are making money hand over fist because they are probably paying quite a lot for gas. But this obviously would contribute to the revenue, the positive revenue position that Roger spoke about. I think we've now recorded $54 billion in revenue for 2022, for fiscal 2022, which is, probably in the top 4 revenue numbers in the history of Trinidad and Tobago. So now, having dealt with price, and of course, I just pointed out to you that the price environment remains very robust. Although gas is coming down in Europe, it's still very high. The ammonia price is high because there's a shortage of ammonia in the world because European ammonia producers have closed down plants. And at the same time, there's been a rebound in demand for ammonia. So that's the price environment. The issue in Trinidad really is the production situation. And this is a very telling graph. This graph shows 12 years of natural gas production data. And it shows the changes in natural gas production each year. So each one of those floating bars is a change, and the orange being a negative change and the blue being a positive change. And if you look very closely at the orange bars, you would see 2 very large orange bars representing 2020 and 2021. We had a significant drop in natural gas production in 2020 and 2021. And there will be a small increase of 120 in the year 2022, based on my forecast for this year, which helps, but it doesn't get us back anywhere close to where we need to be. So we've really come down from a peak, and 2010 was our peak gas production of 4,330 million cubic feet of gas per day, down to 2,702 in 2022, significant fall in gas production. And about half of that fall really happened in that 2020-2021 period. And that, of course, manifests itself in the closure of plants and the closure of Train 1. We are unlikely to see Train 1 ever restart. We have a couple of plants in Point Lisa still down, the Titan methanol plant, the Yara plant is down, another methanol plant is down, and so on. So gas production continues to be a problem. There will be some improvement in 2022, marginally, and some marginal improvement in 2023, but it is nowhere near where we really need to be. This is a graph now showing the real GDP for energy for that period 2012 to 2021. And again, the decline after 2015 is largely as a result of the decline in gas production. And this shows, the relationship between oil and gas production as represented by the blue line, combined oil and gas production in one line, and its correlation to the economy in the orange line. So as oil and gas production rises and falls, so too does our economy. And of course, again, to try to form the point, this shows the history of employment in the sector from 2011 to 2021. And you could see, again, after 2015, a significant drop in employment. And Dr. Tiwari spoke about migration. And I want to tell you all that the migration of energy sector professionals is significant. Because I know many of these people, I went to school with many of these people, and I know that, I'm speaking to them now, and I'm speaking to them on a WhatsApp number that is Canadian. Many have gone to Canada. One of my friends, one of my close friends from my professional life is now in Calgary. That is not not Devant Mirage, actually, it's actually somebody else. And I have friends from the energy sector, people from Point Lisas, who have gone to live in places like Nova Scotia and so on. We are losing a lot of these professionals. So when you ask, what you are seeing here in this graph is almost a loss of about 7,000 jobs. And you might be tempted to say that it is Petrotrin that is driving that downward trend. And that is just part of the story, because the Petrotrin factor is actually here around 2018. Now, this decline here is Petrotrin. It's much bigger than Petrotrin. And it is the energy services sector that has been largely in decline. There have been, job losses in BP. I think BP, when I was Minister of Energy, BP had close to 1,000 employees. I am told that they're now down to about 650. And, it makes me wonder if people in Trinidad know where the energy sector is. Because I ask myself, where is the energy sector? And I get the impression that the energy sector is in the Hyatt ballroom, right? Because whenever there is any discussion about the energy sector, it is in the Hyatt. And if you go to places like, if you go to Point Lisas, if you go to Point Apia, if you go to Guayaguayari, if you go to Faizabad, if you go to Santa Flora, if you go to Point Fortin, I would think that is where the energy sector is. But many people in Trinidad seem to have an allergic reaction to South Trinidad. I don't know why, but if you go to these places, you would see the evidence of the decline of the sector. You would see food places that were bustling with activity 6-7 years ago now closed, and I saw this quite recently. So this has been part of the migration story that Dr. Tiwari talks about. In addition, what is also happening with that migration issue is that Trinidad nationals working for multinationals in Trinidad have been applying for jobs with said multinational with foreign operations. So what they're doing is that they're getting a job within their multinational, but a foreign posting, and using that as a stepping stone, of course, to migrate. And this shows the graph of drilling activity. Again, a similar story. The drilling activity has fallen significantly because the fiscal incentives were not provided on a timely basis. And when they were eventually provided in this budget, in my opinion, they have not gone far enough, and they will not realize any sort of stimulation of investment. And this is a graph that I borrowed from Minister Imbut. This is actually his graph from the Spotlight event. And the blue on the graph shows the oil and gas taxes and royalties collected in 2022. And it shows that it has not gone back anywhere close to the peak, which is 19.4 in 2014. And again, the reason for that is that although we have high prices, we have not been able to capitalize fully on these high prices because our production is down significantly. This again is Mr. Imbut's graph from the Spotlight event. I thought this was an interesting graph. He selectively started the graph at 2017 and ended at 2022 and arrived at the conclusion that the policies of the government had led to a broad-based economic recovery of Trinidad and Tobago. And I really would have hoped that he would have started his graph somewhere in 2015, because when we speak about 2022, it would be useful to have a point of reference to 2015 or maybe 2014, when the country was at its peak GDP. So in my opinion, there's been no recovery. The economy contracted by close to 20% in the period 2015 to 2021. About half of that contraction in that period, 49.9% of that 19.3%, is as a result of the decline in the energy sector. The rest of the economy, of course, Trinidad and Tobago's economy is like a pond into which you throw a large boulder, and that large boulder is the energy sector, and the ripple effect is the effect of government spending, of taxes and so on collected. And so the rest of the economy is influenced by government spending and availability of US dollars, which is of course influenced by the health of the energy sector. To get the sector investing again at 2014 to 2015 levels, we need to overhaul that fiscal regime. What I saw in the budget was a tinkering with the fiscal regime that I don't think is going to have any impact on the appetite of companies to invest. We also need to address this whole issue of ease of doing business. And I find that this is something that nobody takes seriously outside of this circle of persons here. And probably outside of the chambers of commerce think it's important. I don't think it's a priority for the government. But it is something which is suffocating investment in the energy and non-energy sectors, but particularly in the energy sector, which is highly regulated. And I just would go back to the fiscal changes in the budget. The changes to the SPT in the budget are insufficient, in my opinion, to stimulate the investments that are needed to resuscitate and to save the oil industry. And I use that word to save the oil industry, because if we continue with the pattern of decline in production that we've seen, I would say over the last 45 years, we probably won't have oil production in Trinidad in 15 to 20 years, because it might just become uneconomic to produce oil. So our oil industry may come to an end, not because of a lack of oil, but because oil has just become uneconomic to produce. I'm not saying the natural gas production will come to an end in that period, but certainly I don't see anything on the horizon to stop the decline of the oil industry. And the issue is not a lack of oil. The issue is the above ground conditions, the fiscal terms, and the ease of doing business. In terms of natural gas production, as I said, there will be a recovery somewhat in the second half of 2022, and that will continue to 2023. But these are marginal improvements in gas production that don't get us back to where we really need to be, back to that, let's say, 2014 level. The energy sector really needs the Manatee project to come into production and deepwater gas to come into production. However, these are out in 2027 or 2028. So between now and then, what happens? So between 2022 and 2026, the natural gas production in Trinidad will continue to be suboptimal, well below what we need, ranging between 2.7 billion cubic feet of gas per day to 3.1 billion cubic feet of gas per day, which is insufficient to meet the installed demand in the country. So if we were to satisfy the needs of all the plants in Trinidad, all the LNG trains, all the ammonia plants, all the methanol plants, all the power plants, down to the light manufacturers in Trinidad, we would need about 4.3 to 4.4 billion cubic feet of gas per day. That, of course, is impossible to envisage at this point in time. So although there will be some improvement in the next 18 months, it still is insufficient to meet the demands of the country. And we therefore will, sort of struggle until hopefully the Manatee project brings some relief out in 2027 or thereabouts. And then finally, a note on Venezuela, because I know it's very topical within government circles. The possibility or the probability of Venezuelan gas coming to Trinidad remains to me a low probability scenario. Even if there was an exemption granted to Venezuela to allow for the Dragon project or the Loran project to proceed, you're still looking at a number of years before that actually happens. So I would assign a low probability to that. And I would recommend to the government that we focus heavily on what we have as our property, which is, our reserves. And I would recommend to the government that if I was in government, I would pursue BHP and, well, BHP is now called Woodside, to get that deep water gas off Tobago to come into production as soon as possible. So that's the end of my presentation, and I'll stick around for some questions.
Thank you very much, Kevin, and I hope you stick around till the end. Just before I ask Dr. Gonzalez to come back in, and leader of our participants could answer the question, do you think this is our darkest hour? And what is your evidence? Because that was a comment that was made by Dr. Tiwari at the start of the presentation. So do you think this is our darkest hour session? And I will, at different points, just jump in with some of the comments that we've seen in the chat. So Dr. Gonzalez, are you ready?
Yes. Yes, hello. Was that question posed to me? Because there was a drop in the signal. I wasn't clear whether you were asking me or one of the other panelists. Are you asking me whether
I'm asking the participants on the chat to just put in the chat a response to the question. Do you think this is our darkest hour? And what is your evidence? While you all continue your discussion, we'll see what comes up in the chat.
Okay, so you're suggesting that we go ahead and when they reply,
yes.
Take that into account. Okay, yes. I get it. Okay, well, we have covered quite a bit. There's lots of questions raised here, lots of issues. We've gone certainly beyond what we would normally discuss in our budget, and we have raised a lot of very interesting questions. There's some interesting questions in the chat, which I guess we'll come back to in a short while. I think starting from where Dr. Tiwari began, I think he, in a sense, looked at the broad issue of transformation and what could be done about getting us out of this kind of mess, as you put it. I think definitely to kind of initially respond to your question, there is a feeling of gloom and doom, largely inspired by the spate of crime, I think, in the country. I think definitely there's that mood in the country that people are beginning to wonder, really, well, what is the future here? The government don't seem to be able to control the rate of crime, and things are getting out of hand. And, everybody, remember, this is a small country, 1.4 million people. Everybody has family and friends who are affected by this. I can't think of anyone. As a matter of fact, I don't know anyone who does not have family or friends affected by this kind of situation. So I can see where that this question is being raised. Dr. Ali raised the issue of the brain drain, and I think certainly this is an interesting point, because again, people are beginning, it was already bad, given the fact that people are using their education to try to acquire larger incomes abroad and so on. But now in the current social situation, I tend to feel that has become a driver in terms of people migrating. As you know, Trinidad has always been different a bit in the region. While we see in Jamaica people largely migrating because at least the middle class professionals migrating because of the social conditions, the economic hardships, as well as the crime and so on. In Trinidad, to some extent, we saw where the economic conditions were never that harsh, and there was always some kind of feeling that they were insulated from the crime. Crime didn't really touch them in that same kind of a way. I think we're seeing some change in that right now. So we are already at a crossroads, and I cannot really say for sure exactly how we go forward or how we come out of this. There are lots of initiatives being taken all around. I think everybody is very conscious of the problem. The government itself keeps saying that they have plans that they want to put into action, certain things to try to reverse the situation. I cannot say that I am seeing, and I think this is where I agree with Dr. Tiwari, a kind of holistic approach, right across the board, a broad set of measures. Let's say a basic set of issues in the or measures in the social and economic field, which would redress this problem in 10 years, let's say. And it's a long-term problem. It's not going to be solved overnight. This is something we have to buckle down with and go over the long term to try to resolve it. As I mentioned sometime ago in one of these seminars, our reform process is really a long-term one that goes probably over about 30 years, and I've learned that from the Chinese, that we tend not to see a reform process as being that long. We tend to feel that, this is what happened to us in the first reform process. By the time we discovered some gas and so forth, by the 1990s and so forth, we came out of the reform process. We didn't stay in the reform process. We hadn't really traveled half of the journey. So I believe now that, to get out of this situation, you're talking about a long-term process that will take at least between 20 or 30 years. And yet the phases of that reform that is going to become even more difficult as we go along. As the Chinese say, they're now swimming in deep water reform, where things are even more difficult than when Mao was there. And I was amazed to see, that they had achieved so much, yet still they were still, at least the policymakers, were still feeling that a difficult road lies ahead. And they have so much more to do in terms of reforming things to make China a modern, sustainable economy. Well, I think to some extent we need to have that kind of perspective. It's a long process. You need to mobilize the society to do that. And from that point of view, I was interested in Dr. Tiwari's presentation, insofar as the kind of, that political economy analysis that where you looked at all that is necessary to move things forward, because it's not just economic measures here that are required. You need a lot more here to try to pull this thing together. As we are seeing here, there are forces coming from all sorts of directions from outside of this country that are impacting on us and so forth. So we have to be able to tie all these things together and make a strong push forward. But I don't want to spend too much time on that, but just to say that I think that issue that Dr. Tiwari raised, that is the need to look at this in a broad way and tying all the various strands. I think that's a point of view which is a very legitimate one, and we need to think a little more along those lines. Otherwise, when we think in these silos and believe, okay, we change our budget here, we introduce some new incentives here, we're going to solve certain things, it is not going to happen. You have to learn to operate on a broad front and mobilizing people across the board. And that is something which I'm not sure that we're anywhere near there. You've heard me talk a lot about the kind of adversity that operates in the country and the difficulty of bridging the ethnic divide and how difficult it is to move this country forward. I mean, you just look around every day and you see it, and you realize, faced with these kind of problems, it is quite a task to really solve some of these problems. But I wanted to move on and just make a small comment before I pass back to you, Denise. There are a number of questions on the chat. I took note of some of them, but I'm going to leave you to really raise them. I have one or two of them there that I could raise, but I'm going to leave it to you to raise some of them. But before I do that, I wanted to come back to Roger on the question of how do we reverse what he called the drainage of foreign exchange coming from the non-tradable sector, which is expanding because of cheap Venezuelan labor. We've had that discussion going for quite a while. I mean, since the migration started, we wrote a book on the Venezuelan migration together with Dr. Tiwari and Dr. Gookool. And it's an issue that is very troubling in the sense that what he's saying is that because of the cheap labor available from these migrants and their propensity to go into that non-tradable sector, he's talking about all of the retail sector and the the entertainment industry, the hospitality industry. That sector is going to expand or keeps expanding and drawing foreign exchange and drawing labor away from other sectors that would need that labor. That is, let's say, the more profitable, the ones that we should be focused on, which are the tradable ones, the non-energy tradable ones that would enable us to earn more foreign exchange. Now, I got the impression that the non-tradable sector had taken quite a hit here since COVID and with the general collapse in the economy. I don't have the data in terms of how many, retail outlets, bars, and hospitality things have collapsed and how things are going outside here. But what I would suggest, and I think I did do so some time ago, is that we probably need a good empirical survey. We need a serious survey to try to see what is happening in that non-tradable sector and see to what extent it may be jeopardizing our expansion in more profitable, more worthwhile non-energy tradable sectors. So it's something I'm not very clear on, but my impression was that the market would take care of it. The market would take care of it in that the non-tradable sector would no longer be profitable as foreign exchange would become very difficult to get. And as wages go down, you would not have that same kind of demand for that kind of activity. And as a result, these migrants would be forced to go into other things, which would be agriculture, manufacturing, and so on and so forth. And that was my position when we started this argument. I'm not sure where we are now on this in terms of what's happening on the ground and so on. I saw many migrants turning towards agriculture and some going into manufacture. The MIC was even doing training for a number of them into agriculture. So again, here, it's an open question. I don't have hard evidence to really suggest that it is not happening like that. But I would leave it at that at this point in time. And finally, I would say to Kevin that yes, production of gas, which is the key thing in our future, is reliant on so many things that it is hard for us to say that the future is likely to be bright. I think he's basically correct if you look at what is happening outside there. We are mature fields. We have to producers have to go into the deep water to find gas. Starting oil drilling with Venezuela is a very, very difficult thing, given all that is involved and so on. And the Manatee field, of course, is a long-run thing by 2028 and so forth. So that in the meantime, we don't have too much to really hope for. I am not sure that we have thought through this thing pretty thoroughly. I see where we are talking about LNG gas for the islands, for the small islands, and using small containers to supply the small islands. I don't know where that gas is coming if we can't even supply Point Lisas and some other places here. I hear there's some talk about the Guyana gas, but Guyana seems to have a preference or want to use its gas to produce its own power and probably do other things and so forth. Of course, it would be a feasible thing. Guyana is not far from here. You could easily run a pipeline, and some of those fields are very close to our borders and so forth. But again, that's more or less a long-term thing. It's not going to happen overnight in terms of the horizon that Kevin is thinking about. And I agree with him basically on the Venezuelan situation. Okay, Manatee may start by 2027. Getting gas from the Dragon, which is much closer to us, is problematic. The Venezuelans have never accepted that they should sell gas abroad. They have never exported gas, and they were trying to make one exception for us here in Trinidad. And of course, the American sanctions came along and it stopped it. Now, the demand, we are emphasizing the demand for gas in Europe and trying to tell the Americans that, look, Europe needs gas. You want Europe to get gas. Therefore, there's a possibility we have an idle LNG plant that could use a lot of that gas and ship that gas up to Europe. And I don't know if we're going to finally convince the Americans about that. The whole thing with the Americans are still not sure how they want to move on Venezuela. And I think the Biden administration is waiting at least until after the midterm elections before it takes a final decision on this. Yes, he's up in some respects, and things have normalized in some areas with Venezuela, but you had big decisions which would allow investment to start going back into Venezuela and making an exception for Trinidad to get gas from Venezuela. I think those decisions are still down the road. And I think certainly we'll wait. Let's see in the next couple of months what they may do. It depends, of course, on how things go in Europe. If Europe begins to continue to have problems, as we see, he may well decide, okay, he's going to open up a bit and relax these sanctions. But that is all I want to say at this point. There's a lot to say in these things. I think there's some interesting comments in the chat, and I've taken some note, but I'll pass back to you, Denise, and you can probably raise some of these questions in the chat.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gonzalez. And there are a number of questions, but I want some clarification from Dr. Tiwari. Dr. Tiwari, you commented that 93% of our expenditure in the budget is recurrent and
Yeah, that is correct, yes.
7%. But what does that mean?
Well, it means you have very, very little room for government to spend for development things which can make a productive difference in the life of the country. And many times when you look at the items, they are not spent on things that could really make that difference. And it means that all our revenues are caught up in, what can I say, paying salaries and wages and basically supporting a bureaucratic system that ultimately yields an uncompetitive economy. And you have a significant amount of that too in what you might call transfers and subsidies. About 57% is in transfers and subsidies. And as I indicated, almost all of our state enterprises are loss-making. The minister made a special mention of social grants, which he identified as being I'm looking at it now, 5.453 billion. So, I mean, that you can't do anything in this country if you continue with the same pattern of expenditure. And that is a point I've made about the budget over and over again. And you can't change the pattern of expenditure unless you change the structure of the demand on the expenditure that you have now. So, I mean, there are major things that we need to do in the country. To be fair to Prime Minister Rowley, when the pandemic set in and he established the roadmap committee, he did say that he wanted the roadmap committee to do something that would put the country in a position to be able to act after the pandemic. A kind of what you might say, new start, fresh start over. But that never happened. The committee came, it became a public relations exercise. Nothing is being done, it's not connected to anything in the budget, although they talk about it. And I mean, we have reached a point, I am sorry to say, where unless we do something dramatic that is positive and developmental and strategic about the future, we are not going to have any future. We are going to implode.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tiwari. Professor Hussain, do you have anything you wish to contribute to this? You need to.
Only to say that unless,
Unmute.
you are not hearing me.
Yes, yes, I'm hearing you. Yes.
You see, Dr. Tiwari just mentioned the term structure of the economy. And I know Paula Gopi School has been putting in a lot of work on trade. And I see the TTMA putting in a lot of work on getting manufacturing exports and manufacturing output to double by 2025. And to me, that's the, if you were to ask me to identify one bright light in the economy, I have to be fair and identify the efforts of the manufacturing TTMA alongside the Ministry of Trade. But how? How do you have an intelligent conversation, Denise, with anybody when the murder level for 2022, as it stands, I checked it about 4 minutes ago, would be about 607 if you do a linear extrapolation? Who in their right mind would invest here in the way that they would want to invest? Half of your money have to go in burglar proofing, another part have to go in for security guard. Every time you hear a noise, you have to walk outside and check what kind of, if you're a researcher, what kind of productive output you will get. If you are a shopkeeper and every 10 minutes you think somebody is coming to rob you, how much economic activity would you get done? Your talent and your capacity will become diminished by fear, by watching over your back. Your productive time will become lost. The country, in my view, based on what I see in terms of crime, is in an extremely bad position. I could live in a depression and I could eat bhaji and baigan wholly and be comfortable. No big deal. Boil an egg, eat some bhaji and I good. But when you have to leave your home and a vehicle could be following you, when you have to walk out of a classroom somewhere 8 o'clock in the night and you are worried about reaching home, how you can have the highest per capita GDP in the world. It doesn't matter because you find it difficult to exist as a person. So my closing comment would be to the powers that be, take our crime situation and put it on the frontiers of front burners. The people of Trinidad and Tobago have the capacity to pull ourselves out of this recession. Sorry, not a recession, depression. But we need space to work. We need the freedom to breathe oxygen and to put in effort without the thought of a man pulling a gun by your head or a cutlass by your throat. You go to sleep in the night, you don't want to only be thinking about somebody coming through your window. I read some of the comments of the Minister of National Security, and somebody, I think it was Dr. Tiwari, read out from it today. When I think he read it out in relation to a conversation the Minister of National Security was having with some new recruits. And he himself understands the problem. So we are all on the same page, but what we want is measures to hold this. When you see school children, young boys and girls beating up a taxi driver or a maxi taxi driver, who would want to live here? When every other video you see school children fighting and coughing down one another and pulling down here, and it's frustrating. And all we are saying, and because certainly I am not migrating, I am going to die here. We need an instantaneous plan, we need a medium-term plan, and we need a long-term plan. And we need it to be done in a caring way and in a way with compassion. And so I would close with that comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Hussain. That was an emotional. The other big issue that we have, the other big issue that confronts all of us every day is that the transportation situation, I think, is worse than pre-pandemic. What I expected after the pandemic was an opportunity to reset our country. But there are elements that you have to reset, that you have to make a difference in. The whole digitization that Dr. Tiwari talked about is extremely important, and we're not seeing what is happening there. So crime, transportation, and digitalization are, to me, the key issues that we ought to be focusing on. And then the other issue that I think would make a difference, another human being. So there's no warmth, there's no reaching out to the humanity in you. What there is a lot of autocratic and dictatorial approaches to the way we do things. But let me now invite Dr. Tiwari.
Hello.
Do you have any comments that you wish to make? Yes, we're hearing you. Yes,
No,
Dr.
no.
Tiwari.
On the transportation thing, I don't wish to be long, but I mean, if we simply had a work from home policy and we seriously address the issue of decentralization and we rationalize mass transportation, we don't even need to go to rail. We can do it by simply rationalizing the buses, the quality of buses, and managing the times and the routes properly, east-west and north-south. But you would need also to make parking arrangements possible. I think those 3 or 4 things could solve a lot of transportation issues. You know, the work from home policy, and you could solve that by the productivity issue, which is that you don't check time, you check what people are supposed to produce and achieve. The decentralization strategy, which is real and which we have postponed a mass transit system based on buses, which could be easily done using the existing routes. You don't have to build anything, but you would need parking facilities to support and manage that, and efficient public transport. And those things can be done, and you don't need rocket science, you don't need 10 years. You can do all of those things within a given year.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tiwari. I just want to pull one comment from the chat. This is Watts, who says there are also no opportunities for young graduates in certain fields because our country is very much behind and have not expertise as yet. For example, the climate change or renewable energy sector. Our young graduates in these fields migrate because there's nothing here for them yet. Do you have any comments on that? This is the whole issue of climate change and renewables. And
well, the truth is that we have to build a new economy. We cannot have an energy economy anymore. And while we need to do the best we can to make the most out of that until it ends, because it's coming to an end eventually, you need to build a new economy. And that new economy, we have everything for the new economy. We have sun, so we could build solar. You'll have a competition there for land space on the solar issue. We have wind. We could do some of that. I don't know if we are at the point where we can do anything with the ocean, but we are an island and we have more ocean than land space. But I think that and I certainly think that we could create the investment strategy around the human capital that we are exporting. If you and robotics and all the other things, artificial intelligence and so on, and you talk to them about the human capital that you are putting out of the system, about 5,000 a year, and this was a human capital base with which you can do something, you can have a lot of industries here that are export oriented. If you introduced the digitalization process and system into existing industry here, whether it is agriculture, whether it is tourism, whether it is manufacturing, if you put artificial intelligence in order to upgrade, because that is what digitalization is about, you would then need these graduates. You can't do that with people who don't have a sophisticated understanding and technological appreciation capability. But the state and the private sector have to act in concert to achieve something today and tomorrow and next year. You cannot do that by talk and old talk and by explaining. You have to do it by action. And the action is the missing ingredient.
Anybody wants to contribute to that comment? Okay, if there are no comments from the gentleman, I will take a comment from that I'm seeing in the chat. And this is, I quite like this chat from Bashir. Bagu and multinationals leave en masse unless the government stops looking for the silver bullet solutions such as big gas fines or major heavy industry investments, instead of focusing on greatly increasing international competitiveness and leveraging our educated population for national development. And entrepreneur we saw there, and we'd like to end at 9 o'clock. I like to end on time, and I know my friends sometimes tell me, oh gosh, let's go for a little further. No, I said, no, if you invite people for 7 to 9, let's do that. So as we come to an end, can I invite our presenters to give their parting commentary? And I wanted to start with Kevin, but I'm not sure if Kevin is still with us.
Yeah,
Kevin, what would be your, yes, please.
My parting commentary is that, in 2002, Colombia was in a much worse position than Trinidad and Tobago is today. And with leadership, Colombia was able to turn its economy around. And they had a lot more serious problems than us. They had, narcotics, they had, Pablo Escobar, and they had the FARC and so on. And a lot was done to turn Colombia around. So I think that we are not as bad as the position Colombia was in. I think there's a lot to work with in Trinidad. One of the things that I keep talking about is the maritime economy, what Dr. Tiwari refers to as the blue economy. I think we have to think creatively about the Port of Port of Spain and what the Port of Port of Spain could do. I think we have to think about the role of Plebdeco and Point Lisas and the Port of Point Lisas, because there's room for expansion there in Point Lisas. I think we have to think about Labidco and the role that Labidco could play. There is the Escort dock in Point Lisas that is underutilized. And there's the Port of Galeota, where when I was minister, we finished the phase 1 of the Port of Galeota. And Dr. Tiwari would know about the Port of Galeota. It was part of the PSIP. There was a plan to do a phase 2 of Galeota. It has never happened. And then, of course, we have Chaguaramas, a natural deep water harbor, where a lot of the oil industry services originate from Chaguaramas. So I think that blue economy is really where we have to head for diversification and job creation. We could create thousands of jobs, and we could link that blue economy back to agriculture, to supply cruise ships and to supply vessels and so on. So I would just leave on that note that to me is where I think we have to head. There are other things that we have to do. The renewable energy, I agree, is something that we have to do. In terms of crime, I have, should we think about moving to a cashless society? And would having a cashless society disincentivize criminal behavior? Is there something to think about? Should we be thinking about decentralization of Port of Spain to reduce this traffic, which is part of the whole, it creates a health problem when people have to spend 5 hours per day in traffic. It creates all sorts of mental problems at home. You can't exercise, you can't go home to teach your children not benefiting from your presence at home. Blood circulation is used in people's legs and so on, all these things. So decentralization of Port of Spain, a cashless society is something we need to think about too. Those are some of the creative solutions that I think we have to think about beyond where we are right now. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Kevin. And Kevin, you just reminded me that Susan Francois did a TED Talk at TEDx Port of Spain on a cashless society.
Thank you.
Society, so kind of overview of it. Can I now move on to Professor Hussain to give us your 1-minute wrap up?
I didn't hear Denise well. Denise, did you ask me or Dr. Tiwari?
I asked you.
Okay, so I would like to close enough to say, I really appreciate the conversation. It's really a joy to me. And I hope the students and everyone else on here appreciates it. A joy to hear such distinguished, seasoned people like Professor Gonzalez, Dr. Tiwari, and Kevin speak. I learned so much even at this stage of my life from these people that the whole country should be hearing this, and we need to improve on this formula. And then is the way that you manage this session. I don't think anybody else should be doing this beside you. You really keep us in order. You do an excellent job. I thank you for that. And Rebecca and Christian, who does the work behind the scene, I would like to say thank you for their efforts. So I would stop there, Denise.
Thank you very much. We're going to end with Dr. Tiwari.
All right. I wonder if Rebecca can put up the one slide I had. If you look at that slide, I'm asking, what is it? Is it economic? Yes. Is it, but it's more than that. Is it financial? Yes, but it's more than that. Is it government? Yes, but it's more than that. Is it parliament? Yes, but it's more than that. Is it the party system? Yes, but it's more than that. Is it governance and institutions? Yes, but it's more than that. Is it corruption? Yes, but it's more than that. Is it constitution? Yes, it is more than that. Is it a grasp of the challenge? Yes, but it is more than that. Is it loss of credibility? Yes, but it's more than that. Is it breakdown of trust? Yes, but it's more than that. Is it breakdown of communication, absence of option, fear of choice? It's all of that, but it's more than that. But I want to say that Trinidad and Tobago is not a failed state. We are not a basket case. And we are in a position where if we make choices, we can move forward and see economic progress, prosperity, and sustainability. And we can bring some humanity about it so that we do not create the conditions for inequity to be so bad. I think we have to make a conscious choice now to determine whether this is what we are going to do about it, or whether we are going to abandon our society and go away. And I think if we make the choice to stay, then we must act.
Thank you ever so much. And that is a wonderful note to bring this session to an end on. And I just want to join Professor Hussain by telling him that I am not leaving either. And I want to say to Dr. Tiwari that I will continue to take action, and I hope the people on this channel take action to make our country a better place, because we have the potential. And I'm so happy to hear that you don't think we're a basket case, that we have some hope. So we look forward to the next conversation. Join hope. We're not allowed to do that on this. We've had, at one point, we had 45 people on the chat, and that's absolutely wonderful on a Friday afternoon. We're now down to 34. Thank you very much, and all the best to you, and good night. Thank you very much, Dr. Gonzalez, as well. Thank you. Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Professor Hussain, congratulations.